Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like the activity in the waiting room started to calm down here. So welcome everybody to our webinar. I'm Jonathan, and I'm part of the Team Cascadia advising team at First Pacific Financial. Thanks again for joining our webinar, Does ESG Investing Have Impact? We are excited to share some of our thoughts about ESG and recent headlines, as well as just explain generally how we approach ESG. For those of you who aren't familiar, our firm is located in Vancouver, Washington, and throughout the Pacific Northwest. We call ourselves Team Cascadia. And you can see that highlighted here in the green. That's a geographic region defined by similar characteristics. Think about the wet climate, as well as some of the wildlife and fish that we all enjoy and experience here. You can see the icons on our office locations from south to north. We have Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, and Juneau, Alaska. Again, we're Team Cascadia. We have multiple advising teams at our firm. We're a fee-only RIA and also a B corporation. You can see a little bit of information here. That's a voluntary process that we went through a few years ago to really rate our business practices and sustainability. We believe on having an impact in our communities, and that's part of the philosophy behind the B corporation. It's really rooted in something known as stakeholder capitalism, which is an opposition to shareholder capitalism, which is more well known. Shareholder capitalism is really focused around returning investors the profits of the companies that they invest in. Stakeholder capitalism is a little bit at odds to that, where you want to look at a more complete picture of all the stakeholders that have an interest in how a company does business. So think about the environment, a company's workers, as well as just the communities where those businesses are located. Again, we're Team Cascadia. I'm Jonathan. We also have Adam Wishard. He's our team lead and a shareholder in our firm, and Meredith Morse, one of the advisors on our team as well. Many of you may be clients of ours already. If you are a client of another advising team at our firm, we're glad you're interested in this topic and would encourage you to follow up with your advising team and ask more questions of them as well. So today we're interested in focusing our conversation around just a few main topics. First, just defining what ESG is, and then sharing a few impact stories or specific examples of a company that is an example of ESG. We also want to talk about greenwashing and some recent headlines, and talk about some of the resources and tools that we use when we're evaluating a company from ESG metrics. So first of all, what is ESG? It's a framework that we can use to evaluate a company. E, S, and G stand for environmental, social, and corporate governance. On the right side of the screen here, you can see this kind of wheel, and each segment shows a different metric that we can evaluate a company from. So for example, in corporate governance, we're looking at executive compensation, board diversity, or other items similar to those. Social, you would see human rights, diversity, workplace benefits, etc. Environmental, maybe a little bit more obvious to some of us, sustainable agriculture, water use, climate change, etc. This is a little bit different than SRI. You can see here in the text, sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. That's more about the values or the impact side of the investments themselves. But ESG, that's again, more data-driven, more objective, or more of a cold or mathematical way to look at a company. So that's really just putting those screens to evaluate the environmental, social, and corporate governance aspects of a company. And we also came across this quote from John Hale: using ESG factors allows for a more holistic view of material investment risks and opportunities than may be possible from financial analysis alone. And this is really getting at the point that ESG is an added layer of scrutiny that we can use to evaluate companies and funds, and again, get a deeper or more holistic view of what's going on. A couple little pictures here. As you can see, this one on the left, we see that ESG screening can get pretty complicated and convoluted pretty fast. And on the right here, we have Elon Musk, who's had a little bit of a varied history with ESG and the SEC. So I think Adam is going to talk a little bit more about him coming up here. So Adam, why don't you give us a couple examples of impact stories?
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a great introduction and a little primer on ESG. And we've been doing ESG investing for a long time, back when socially responsible investing was more prominent, and these acronyms kind of bounce around over the years, so it's good to get a little explanation. But one of the reasons we're really excited to do this webinar is we are releasing a first annual ESG Handbook. This handbook will have some of the content that we're describing today and presenting, but one of the prime things that we're releasing is these impact stories. So this is kind of really not just what the investments are doing, the performance. It's also going to talk about some of the impact that ESG in our portfolios has gone to make an impact. There's different ways to make an impact when it comes to ESG. And ESG funds. One is through advocacy. So some of the fund managers engage with governments and organizations to advocate for positive change. Another is community investing, so investing in communities throughout the world. Engagement as a shareholder of companies. Shareholders can engage with the corporate, the board of directors or the executive team. And then finally, some featured holdings. So I'm going to talk about some of these impact stories that are featured in our handbook. Everyone will receive a copy of the handbook after the webinar. We'll send it out so everyone sees. So revisiting Tesla here and Elon Musk. So this is an example of engagement. So Calvert Investments, Calvert Funds has been around for a very long time, and they are definitely in our portfolios. And one of the examples of an engagement story more recently is with Tesla. So one of the reasons Elon Musk had somewhat of a negative view around this, and I believe this tweet was less than a year ago, is they made headlines when Standard & Poor's ESG fund removed them from their ESG fund. And of course, Elon Musk thought, hey, we're doing so much to combat climate change and advance electric vehicles. How could you be removing us from a fund? And I would argue that this is why ESG matters, because executives, these companies, they care about dollars leaving their stock. And in this example, the reason Standard & Poor's was removing them had less to do with the environment, less to do with climate change mitigation. It actually has a lot to do with their workforce. They've had several racial discrimination lawsuits over the years. And so instead of Standard & Poor's removing them from their index or their fund, one of the solutions that Calvert took was to actually engage with Tesla. So they've engaged with them and filed shareholder resolutions to start doing more on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they've requested that they provide regular reporting on not just their board of directors, which is public information, and their race and gender makeup, but also all their employees and their workforce. So a good example right now, 22% of Tesla's workforce are women. So they're obviously dominated by males compared to the normal population. And then, as I already mentioned, some of their lawsuits have been around race. And since some of the engagement, and you can say, hey, you can point to the engagement from shareholders as one of the reasons that they're reacting to it, Tesla, or you could just say that they're coming around to believing that in order to be relevant, in order to be It's not too far different than consumers deciding that they're going to stop shopping at stores that don't have good business practices. It's the same for investments, and so they want to keep their stockholders there. So their largest growing population in their workforce is actually Black and African Americans. It's been growing by 60% a year in the last couple of years, and again, I think that is a win and where we're seeing an impact. And obviously Calvert at some point may decide to divest from Tesla if they don't feel like they're making good enough progress, but it's a great example where we think that they are making progress, making an impact by engaging with Tesla. The next couple impact stories are going to be some featured holdings in some of our ESG portfolios. Livent is an example of a lithium mining company, primarily lithium operation or mining operations in Argentina, but they're a global organization. And lithium, as many people know, is a controversial topic, mining in particular. And we really feel that Livent is one of the good actors in this space. They're not just going in and mining and kind of decimating communities and the environment. They're being more responsible. They were one of the early signers onto the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, which is IRMA. If you've done any digging on kind of the downsides of these mining operations for precious metals, IRMA is a great organization that does regular ongoing audits of the mining operations and making sure that they're kind of continuing to be good actors, being responsible. So responsiblemining.net is IRMA's homepage, and you can see right on the homepage right now they have a scheduled exam, if you will, or audit of one of Livent's mining operations in Argentina coming up here in a couple weeks. Next featured holding is SolarEdge. SolarEdge is a public stock. It is one of the largest manufacturers of solar inverters. Obviously, solar is going to play a key role in the move to renewable energy sources. And SolarEdge has really kind of revolutionized solar and making it a lot cheaper for utility companies to move off fossil fuels. And one of the examples of a SolarEdge project is actually up in Alaska. Our Alaskan participants can correct me if I pronounce this wrong, but Kotzebue is a small town 30 miles above the Arctic Circle. So time like this, I looked it up right now, there's 6 to 7 hours of sunlight. So they're providing energy. The sun is just 6 to 7 hours a day, and this kind of tells you how far solar has come to be able to power this entire village of 3,000 residents and really move this village off of fossil fuels. So now, moving off 1.2 million gallons of diesel per year being used. Now diesel is just their backup fuel or energy source, which I think is another huge win, a way that one of our featured holdings is making an impact. Last one is more community investing, and this is community investment in promoting higher education. And one of the historic Black colleges and universities, we love acronyms, HBCU. One of them that's been around for a very long time, since 1867, is Howard University. So Domini Funds, another holding within our ESG portfolios, has provided bonds to Howard University to really promote education in some of these different communities. And you look at some of the statistics here, 50% of lawyers and doctors, 25% of Black undergraduates who have degrees in science, technology, and engineering are provided opportunities through HBCU. So these bonds to these universities is really making a pretty substantial impact within the Black and African American community. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Adam. Those are all great examples of how ESG screens have identified companies that would be worth investing in if you're using ESG to evaluate your portfolio. And then you can also see through some of those examples, direct impact on communities. One thing that's been a common question that we've received from clients, or we've also noticed it being in the news a lot, is the idea of greenwashing. So we want to take a few minutes just to discuss first what that is and provide some examples that you may have already noticed in your doom scrolling news feed on Google or Apple or whatever device you're using, as well as explain a little bit about how we determine who may be greenwashing and select against those companies. And then again, give some specific examples of tools that we use and one real world example of a greenwasher. So you're probably familiar already, but greenwashing is conveying a false impression, saying that you're going to do something and then not following through, making promises that you have no intention of following up with, or overstating sustainability standards. Some examples that we've seen in the news recently, if you look at these headlines, the Financial Times, HSBC ads banned for misleading consumers about green credentials. On face value, that looks bad. So you would, even just from seeing the headline, have an opinion about HSBC. Time.com, Climate Week, New York City was a greenwashing bonanza. Even if you don't read the article, you're being sort of steered to believe that Climate Week was a hoax or fake news or whatever. Bloomberg, BlackRock's ESG troubles mount as Missouri pulls $500 million. And this gets at a sort of trend in state pension funds. In this example, it's Missouri not allowing their state pensioners to select ESG funds on their menu of options. And this has happened in multiple states. One point of interest is that 94% of state pension funds allow cryptocurrency to be selected on their menus, but there is this backlash against ESG. Then just a brief discussion on how we can detect greenwashing. So the first way that we would look to see what a company is promising is through their corporate sustainability reports. These are publicly available. So first we want to see if a company is actually creating one. These corporate sustainability reports, or CSRs, are currently optional. So it's typically a good sign if a company is creating one in the first place and has some momentum towards sustainability. But just because they've made some promises, like we were discussing, it doesn't mean that they're actually legitimate. So we can take a look at these and see if they're believable, or if they may be a little overly flashy, or including language that just doesn't really seem to be believable. Then we also want to see if there's follow through. So we can see what promises or standards are being created, and then follow up and see over the months and years if they're achieving their targets and making good on the promises that they're putting in those CSRs. Then we can also go to other data providers. There's a nice list. That's just a few. There are very many providers like MSCI, Sustainalytics. Those are probably the main two, but S&P, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Thomson Reuters, ISS, Bloomberg, etc. There's an exhaustive list of places you can go for this kind of data. And then there's also some specialized tools that are more geared toward financial advisors, like our team here. And those include Ethos ESG, Your Stake, and Clarity AI. And we'll talk a little bit about one of those later. But part of the problem with where all of this, how all of this data is used and where we're at with ESG reporting is that there really isn't any standardization. So I've put together 4 examples here to show that the data gets digested and then presented in many different ways. So for example, ISS gives a quality score of 1 to 10. And up here, MSCI, we've got a letter grade from AAA to CCC. So obviously, you're looking at a very different system, numbers and letters with different segments. It would be hard to compare. Even Bloomberg and ISS, they both use a number system, but Bloomberg is from 0 to 100 and ISS is from 1 to 10. So hard to compare apples to apples. Thomson Reuters gives a percentile score and a letter grade, more like your college or high school homework, A+ to D-. Again, just hard to compare. There's no standardization on these reporting sources. One last point on the reporting. There is a push towards standardization, and that's a proposal from the SEC. And if we can get this reporting to be more consistent, that's only going to make ESG more legitimate. So one example here is Volkswagen. I think we probably all remember a few years back, there was a scandal involving their creation of a software patch that they put on their automobiles. This was a clean diesel program. And when the vehicle would go into emissions testing, this software would kick in and change the way the car actually ran and falsely reduce the emissions that were being created. So this was a very deliberate act to make their cars appear greener or cleaner than they actually were. Since that time, they paid millions of dollars in fines, and some people lost their jobs, and they then pivoted toward electric vehicles. And this is a kind of rehabilitation of their image. And they've had some success. The ID4 is a fairly successful electric SUV, but they do still have some work to do. So this screen grab is from Ethos ESG, which is a tool that we rely on. And you can see their overall score is an F, or a 10 out of 100. But if you drill down on some of the different categories, you see that they have made strides to improve on renewable energy. And this is tied to their EV business. But there are all these other categories, even environmental ones, where they still have a lot of opportunity to make progress. So I mentioned the SEC proposal a little bit earlier. And this is also tied to those headlines that we were looking at, because it is true that we need standardization, and that would make ESG analysis a lot more consistent and fruitful. But thinking about those headlines again, there are some companies who don't want to have a requirement or to make disclosures. So what the SEC is actually proposing is that there's standardization of ESG metrics and then a requirement to disclose their scores across those different categories. These would be used in fund prospectuses, annual reports, and advisor brochures. Companies would be required to disclose the greenhouse gas emissions and summarize progress on reaching their goals. Again, that corporate sustainability report would be standardized and then required for all companies. And then shareholder engagement and proxy votes would also need to be disclosed. So going back to the headline, the kind of the backlash against ESG, or somehow claiming that greenwashing is a massive problem, I believe it's tied to this SEC proposal, because this is going to make bad actors more known, more obvious. So some people have a vested interest in not having this SEC proposal go through, and hence sort of a media campaign to try to trash the ESG movement as a whole.
Jonathan, we had a question that is the backlash because of suspected greenwashing, which I think you kind of just answered there, but I would further that is, it kind of depends on who the backlash is from. Pay a lot of attention to who's giving the backlash. It could be some sort of political motivations. In the case of Elon Musk and Tesla, it's obviously because he doesn't want to see stock price go down, because a lot of investors could potentially leave their stock. And if you look at some of the fund companies that were invested in, ESG fund companies, they were actually cheering on the SEC proposal, and they think it's a good thing, and providing input that, hey, maybe you're not even going far enough. We need these standards. I think it's really important.
All right.
Great. Well, next up we have Meredith sharing a little bit more about some of the ESG tools and resources that we rely on.
All right. Well, thanks, Jonathan. Now that we've learned a lot about greenwashing and all of the different sources of information out there that we have to really kind of work through to see what are good investments, we want to talk about the tools that we use to build out, to choose our investments within our ESG portfolios. So some of the tools we're going to be looking at, the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals. Jonathan's talked a little bit about Ethos ESG, but we're going to dig into that a little more. And then we're also going to be talking about some tools that and some resources that are available to just an end user, just any individual, to really dig into this more. So the first tool we want to talk about is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals, it's 17 interlinked goals that the United Nations established in 2015. And the goal, the overall goal for these, you can see there's no poverty, zero hunger, decent work and economic growth. These are really lofty goals that they established as a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. And there's a primary goal within the United Nations for us to achieve these by the year 2030. And so this is a global movement to work towards these. And every 4 years, they're doing reports to see where we are. But a lot of funds and those research providers that Jonathan mentioned, a lot of them will use these Sustainable Development Goals as a framework or a guidepost for really setting their metrics around what they need to be trying to achieve. And this is also what we use. We look at these in our portfolios as well to see how can we really make an impact towards helping move towards that better and more sustainable future for all. And the way that we, the tool that we primarily use is called Ethos ESG. So we've referred to this multiple times, and what Ethos is it's a software that aggregates all of that publicly available information. So some of this information, there's carbon impact, carbon footprint information, public filings, there's all of this different information. They aggregate it and then they analyze it for impact. And then one of the most powerful pieces is they distill it into user-friendly ratings. So we're able to get a much easier glance at how a company really stacks up in a way that is, you can see it at face value, and then you can really dig into the data behind that more. So the methodology that they use, they have 10 primary causes. I'm going to read these off because I can't memorize them all, but they're tied back to those SDGs, those Sustainable Development Goals. And we have climate action, gender equality, health and well-being, inclusive economies, innovation, life on Earth, peace and justice, quality education, sustainable resource use, and water and sanitation. So these are the 10 primary causes that Ethos is aligning or really measuring up funds and companies and brands against. And within these 10 causes, they have 45 sub-causes. They have also created 2 to 6, or they have 2 to 6 metrics, or they've defined metrics for each of these causes. They can have up to 40 metrics per cause. So they are really drilling down on each of these to see how companies, funds are really contributing or detracting from this cause. They then aggregate all of this data. So some more of the data that they might use, patents, pay data, taxes paid. There's just so much data out there. They pull it all together, normalize it with a 0 to 100 score. This is how we are able to get that, to really get that comparative look at how this fund or company is performing. We can create an impact report, which we'll talk more about, and to get a really great look and comparison between funds or portfolios. And then one of the key pieces that we really feel strongly about with Ethos is the data transparency. So they really give a deep look into what data they're using, and you can drill down to the specific data. So we're going to take a look at that now. So here's one example. So equal pay and opportunity. This is one of the sub-causes within gender equality. And so equal pay and opportunity, this is how you can see here they have this for every single cause, the problem that they're trying to solve. So they define that problem, and then they give the companies, you can see this company rating section, and they say, you can sort this by who are the leaders and who are the laggers. So any of the thousands of companies that they're rating, you can see where they fall specifically on this one issue. And then down at the bottom, you can see this how ratings work. And here we have, these are the actual metrics. So I mentioned they have 25 to 40 metrics for each cause. These are the metrics that they're using to gauge how any of these performers are doing, any of these companies, funds. So, gender equality in the workplace, women on the board of directors, public controversies and customer or employee discrimination. So they go into each level, really deep detail as to what it is that they're using to measure these causes. And so we like that we can really drill down into it like this. And what this helps us do is then create an impact report. So whenever we have a client who, we can put in a client who's maybe onboarding, or a client who has an externally held account, we can compare that portfolio that the client has with the portfolios that we have as well. And as we're building our portfolios, we can look at, what are the funds that are really making an impact in these different areas, who's lagging, so that we can build the most ESG aligned portfolios. Within the impact report, there's they have many ways of comparing of looking at the different portfolios or funds. And here's just one example. So here we have back to the SDGs. So that's the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see here we have, this is a sample client with, we ran with a current portfolio that they had externally held. And we put that up against our recommended portfolio, and it shows how how both portfolios really compare for each of these standard sustainable development goals. And so it's, this is something that's really helpful if for any of our existing clients or any clients that are interested in this, if they have externally held portfolios and you want to take a look at that, that's something that we can do. And on the impact report, you'll also see you can do global warming comparisons. So what is the impact that this portfolio would be having on global warming? Looking at carbon comparisons. So the carbon output of the proposed versus recommended, or the existing versus the recommended portfolios. Some of the other kind of really interesting or fun things to look at, they have tangible metrics such as the number of cars removed from the road, months of rent paid, number of meals provided, how much of the rainforest is being saved by each of these portfolios. So it's just, it's just a fun way and an interesting way of looking at how your investments can be making an impact. So Ethos ESG, that is an advisor tool. So that's something that we're able to use, and we can use it along with our clients to help guide the portfolio decisions, but it's not something that's available just to the end user. So we have other resources that are available for anyone who's interested in really wanting to learn more about this on their own. So USSIF, it's ussif.org. They are the Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment. Their goal is to elevate investment practices that consider ESG criteria and to generate long-term competitive financial returns with positive societal impact. So they're really just trying to get that long-term investment, have it be positive financial impact as well as positive societal impacts. What we really like about this site is they have a great education center that offers information and courses, really robust information center, lots of courses or a few courses on ESG investing that are no cost to just to any individual. Another resource is As You Sow, and As You Sow is a corporate watchdog. So they're a nonprofit corporate watchdog. Their mission is to promote environmental and social corporate responsibility through shareholder advocacy, coalition building, and innovative legal strategies. They have this section on their website, Invest Your Values. And here, if you have, if you have, say your 401k, you have funds within that, you really wanted to see how they stack up against any of these values that really resonate with you. We've got fossil-free funds, weapon-free funds, gender equality funds, gun-free, deforestation-free. They have, and they have a few other options as well that you can run your, any of these funds that you're holding against through these resources to see where they stack up.
Thank you, Meredith. As you can see, there are a lot of resources, and we hope to inspire more curiosity for you, and we'll make sure that you have access to this slide deck after the meeting so you can visit these sites as well as just review some of the topics. And if you have more questions, we'd love to hear from you. We'll also make sure to post the recording. And as Adam mentioned, you'll also be able to access the ESG handbook that we've created. Adam, were there some questions in the chat box?
There are, and one of them was whether or not we were going to send out the recording or post it. So we definitely will, in addition to the ESG handbook. And certainly don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions or want some specifics. One of the questions is specific to Ethos ESG. They must have a lot of analysts, PhDs who prepare those reports. Does First Pacific pay for that product, and does the rated company pay for the rating? That's obvious opportunity for corruption and at least bias. Ethos is actually a fairly small organization, and this is the power of technology, but I don't know if Jonathan, if it's easy to go back to that one slide that had the resources on just that specific cause. Yeah, I mean, so there's hundreds of resources or data that they're pulling into their website I've talked to the founder of Ethos, and he's actually more of a computer guy, or a coder that put together the software. And nowadays, it really, oh, there you go. So Jonathan's highlighting the amount of data sources. I can't read that, Jonathan. Can you?
Yeah, it's 158,767 unique data points since 2018, just on this equal pay and opportunity cause.
But I think the point is nothing is perfect. So that's why we review all these different data sources. We've used Sustainalytics, we've used MSCI, we've used some of the other ones that were mentioned today, but not just looking at one single one. One of the reasons we like Ethos is because really it's more of an aggregator of data versus trying to provide their own opinion. And even if you go through and you can sort of customize Ethos to say, if you really primarily want to only screen out some social issues or gender diversity, those kinds of things, you can get very specific, and it actually changes the ratings, knowing that the environmental thing, I don't care how much fossil fuel exposure I have, but I really want to invest along these social issues. You can do that too within Ethos. Okay, let's see. I'll read this one to you, Jonathan. I'll let you answer. So I read that McDonald's greenhouse gas emissions grew by 16% from 2015 to 2020, and it didn't affect the MSCI rating because it didn't pose a financial risk to McDonald's. So the question is, do ESG rating companies only look at how the ESG issues affect a company's financials? Which is a great question. And then
there's a lot
do we look at? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I mean, part of the question is how MSCI is creating their ratings. Another of those providers that I listed may have rated them differently. And then as far as the material risk, I think that's really key. And that sort of hints at one of our big takeaways from today is, and even that John Hill quote, if I can get back there. So that's saying, ESG allows you to find some of those more material risks. And that's really the goal. I'm not familiar with that McDonald's example precisely, but our goal is to really change the conversation more to really what's going to be a financial and what's going to be a material risk to a company moving forward in regards to their sustainability. One example that has come up a lot is engine number one, and this is a small investment company that was able to get a small share of ExxonMobil, just enough to be able to engage with Exxon and actually get 2 new members onto their board of directors who are environmentalists, who are knowledgeable about the oil and gas industry, and really change the conversation from, well, you should clean up your practices because it's the right thing to do or because of the polar bears or whatever, and really change the conversation to good business moving forward is going to be adopting more sustainable practices.
So there's a couple questions about ESG portfolios and for specifics ESG portfolios. So is ESG a portfolio all by itself or simply a screen used in an otherwise ordinary portfolio? So this is a good question, Jonathan. You can, and Meredith, you can fill in the blanks if I leave something out, but there's definitely a spectrum within our clients' portfolios. So some clients decide that they want 100% ESG screen portfolios. They don't want any other, or I guess ordinary portfolios, to use the terms in the question. And then there's some that say, hey, they want to make a transition over time. And so we certainly can implement that. One of the other points that, Jonathan, if you'll advance the slide just one, is that there's many that believe that the ESG is so material to the company's success or sustainability, I guess, to put it more broadly, that just about every fund manager within the next 5 to 10 years will be taking components of ESG, and it'll be an additional add-on to all the other financial metrics that they're normally looking at, like price to earnings ratios and debt and asset levels. ESG will just be naturally another factor within that overall research process. And so even if you have a fund that's labeled ESG, it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, they're doing the best job because of greenwashing. And so Morningstar has removed some of those sustainable funds, even though they're categorized as ESG. Morningstar and Sustainalytics believes that maybe they're not doing a good enough job, so they'll remove them. And then in other cases, there may be one that doesn't have an ESG in their name. They're not even claiming to be ESG fund managers, but they are very much considering all these sustainability issues. So it's kind of an evolving process over time. Jonathan, you want to expand on that?
Maybe just one other small point is there are different ways to create an ESG portfolio. So maybe the most common or one of the original forms of ESG was to create an exclusionary screen, just to say, I don't want any alcohol or tobacco companies. It's easy to just remove those from a fund or index. But there's also a best-in-class screen, which would say, well, I only want the best performer on these metrics. So you may include an oil or natural gas company, but only the very best one of that cohort or that type of company. So maybe that further complicates the answer, but there are different approaches to ESG.
Can you give a specific example of international monitoring / investing? I have one off the top of my head. We just had an investment symposium just this last Friday where all the advisors joined together and had a few presentations. And one of them was a fund that we use called Matthews Sustainable Investment. And they showed us a picture of one of a company that they're invested in India, where they are providing microfinance, so small dollar loans that are helping to have Indian business owners actually sustain or create a new business. And in this particular example, the village that they're showing the picture in was a bunch of women around going to applying for the loan through this publicly traded company that provides this microfinance. And historically, they've been, loans that are very hard to come by, 100% interest rates, whereas this organization is providing very reasonable interest rates and allowing these women to start businesses and being kind of the primary breadwinners for their families, which I thought that was really neat. And so there's lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to see if we can kind of tag team them, see as many of them we can get to as possible. Let's see. Several questions on performance. Meredith or Jonathan, do you want to answer this? So how well does ESG investing stand up to market performance?
Sure. We feel that, we see that for the past 5 years or so, ESG has actually outperformed a lot of the more traditional portfolios. There is this year there's been the energy sector, specifically fossil fuels, has done really well in a market when not everything, most things haven't been doing well. So ESG might be lagging a bit this year, but we don't see that. We see this as a temporary, just a temporary kind of sample in time. And ongoing, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, all of the funds and the legislation, everything that's being put towards these this future climate goals, we really see a lot of opportunity there for ESG portfolios to really lead the way.
I would even further that is just, I really wouldn't, it's okay. Nowadays, we can expect them to be on par with traditional investments or however you want to call it, unscreened investments. It's just another data point. And so, even if they're the same, it's different from 10, 15 years ago, I'd say, where it was really about socially responsible investing, where you're excluding huge portions of the market. And back then there was this sort of stigma that you'd have some underperformance, but now ESG with this, looking at it more as like a data point, I would say that I wouldn't expect there to be a huge discrepancy, and I would say they should be on par with each other. Jonathan or Meredith, you want to tackle some of these other questions in here? Or we have a couple minutes left. Let's see.
So we have,
go ahead.
Are all of your investments evaluated against ESG standards? And how do we define what's acceptable? Or is there some line that results in elimination of consideration? So we're looking at it really holistically. As far as if there's one specific line, we're avoiding fossil fuels within our portfolios. A lot of the standard, the tobacco, those standard ones, but we're really just looking at it holistically, and what do we think are the best investments that we can make that are going to have the greatest impact, without it being necessarily specific to a certain cause.
Great. One more question. I think we touched on a lot of this early on, but do either of you want to expand on, do these rating systems evaluate external accreditation for diversity, equity, and inclusion, such as EDGE certification, which is gender equality, disability inclusiveness, human rights campaign, corporate equality index, LGBTQ plus inclusiveness, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely. Those would all be under the S of ESG. Those would all be data that feed into their ESG score. And that would definitely be part of the ESG scoring on most of those providers that I listed, but definitely in the Ethos tool. So just in the few minutes that we have, we've been looking at this screen, this slide on the screen here, but just wanted to make a couple comments as we wrap up. I love all the curiosity and the questions that you provided. So again, I hope that we've opened the door to more questions and more research. So let us know how we can facilitate that. And we hope to have more of these types of webinars in the future, and maybe even be more targeted in what we present. So please share some of your ideas on what you'd like to see in future webinars. Again, the main question or title of this was, does ESG investing have impact? We believe that it does. And a lot of these questions have been around some of these points as well. But we really do feel that ESG is here to stay. And some would even argue that it's become such a large movement and style of investing that eventually the label ESG may not be necessary anymore. It may just be the way that people evaluate companies and choose the businesses that are going to be around and be successful long term. And that goes to that quote that we were looking at before. We want to have a deeper view of a company and their material investment risks to be able to choose which companies to invest in based on their long-term success. It becomes more of an objective, just business, analytical decision rather than an emotional one. And that's really, this view that ESG is really here to stay is supported by the data. It currently, or as of July of this year, represented $35 trillion of investments globally. And like Meredith was kind of mentioning, in 2022, there's been a big test on ESG because markets have been so volatile and really down in the first few quarters of the year. But if you look at the inflows and outflows in non-ESG funds, there actually was a net outflow of $139 billion through the first 2 quarters of the year. And that really is a product of people moving out of equities and into cash or into bonds. But in that same time period, ESG experienced an inflow or an increase of $120 billion. So despite this volatility in 2022, we see investors wanting ESG, wanting more of it, not less. Again, we feel that this movement behind ESG investing is really changing the conversation, again, more from values to profitability. ESG itself is more data-driven and more focused on just the numbers and less on the values. The question about impact is more of a personalized question. The data feeds into those conversations, but that's really something that we want to engage with clients to determine how the investments can support the values or the impact that they would like to see. As we wrap up, just a couple reminders or disclosures. This was all for educational purpose, not to be seen as investment advice. And we would love to engage more on these topics. There are some other disclosures here. You can feel free to read them. But again, we'll make the handbook and the slides and recording of this available to you. And we do welcome your questions and comments and ideas for future webinars as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope to talk to you more soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.